Welcome to the channel where stories don't just inspire you, they transform the way you see your own life. Today's story is not about fashion. It's not about luxury. It's not even about money. It's about a boy who had nothing, no home, no food, no support, and yet built one of the most powerful brands in human history. This is the story of Louis Vuitton. Before his name became a symbol of luxury, before his initials were stamped on the world's most expensive bags, he was just a hungry child walking hundreds of kilometers to survive. Stay with me, because this journey will change how you think about success, struggle, and what is truly possible. Chapter 1. Born into Hardship, Expanded and Deepened. In 1821, in the quiet countryside of eastern France, a baby boy named Louis Vuitton was born into a world that offered him nothing but struggle. His village, Anchai, was small and isolated, a place where life moved slowly and survival depended on the strength of your hands. There were no grand buildings, no paved streets, no schools filled with laughter, only muddy paths, wooden cottages, and the constant rhythm of labor. Louis entered life without land, wealth, or connections. In a society where birth often determined destiny, he was born at the very bottom. His father, Xavier, was a carpenter, a man whose days were measured in splinters and sweat. He built furniture, repaired carts, and patched broken doors for neighbors who could rarely afford to pay him properly. His mother, Coronne, was a hat maker. She stitched hats for local women, bending over rough fabric by candlelight long after the sun had set. Her fingers were often pricked with needles, her eyesight strained from dim light, yet she worked on because stopping meant hunger. They worked from sunrise to sunset, and still, it was never enough. A childhood shaped by cold and hunger. The Vuitton home was small, damp, and unforgiving. Rain leaked through the roof in spring. In winter, frost crept across the inside walls like ghostly lace. There was no heating, only a weak fire when wood was available. Blankets were thin, nights were long. Winters in rural France were brutal. Snow blanketed the village for months, swallowing the roads and isolating families. The wind cut through the wooden walls like knives, leaving the air inside almost as cold as outside. Young Louis learned early that warmth was a luxury. He slept beside his parents, wrapped in worn fabric, listening to the wind howl through cracks in the walls. Sometimes he woke with numb fingers and a stomach aching from hunger. Food was never guaranteed. Meals often consisted of coarse bread, thin soup, or whatever vegetables could survive the harsh seasons. Meat was rare, reserved for holidays or moments of unexpected fortune. By the age of 8, Louis understood a truth many adults spend their lives avoiding. Life was not fair. Childhood without childhood. While wealthy children in distant towns played with toys and attended school, Louis carried firewood, swept sawdust, and hammered nails beside his father. There were no lessons in reading or writing. His classroom was the workshop. His textbooks were tools. His teacher was necessity. He learned how to measure wood by eye, how to lift weight heavier than his small frame should allow, how to endure splinters, blisters, and exhaustion without complaint. By the age of 8, his hands were already rough from labor. Small hands hardened into tools of survival. Yet there was something unusual about him. He watched. He listened. He noticed. Poverty gave him a hidden gift. Poverty took comfort, but it gave Louis something priceless. Observation. Because he owned nothing, he studied everything. Travelers occasionally passed through Anchai, rare glimpses of a larger world. They arrived in carriages coated in dust from distant roads, carrying elegant trunks strapped to their backs. Their coats were tailored. Their boots were polished. Their voices carried confidence. To the villagers, they were strangers. To Louis, they were proof that another life existed. He would pause mid-task, eyes fixed on the trunk's smooth wood, polished brass corners, leather straps, and intricate locks that gleamed even in dull light. These were not objects of survival. They were objects of movement, of freedom, of possibility. Questions that changed his life. While other children saw travelers and returned to play, Louis remained still, his mind racing. Where are they going? What lies beyond this village? Who builds such beautiful trunks? Why do they get to leave, and we must stay? He had never left Anchai, but his imagination had already crossed mountains. In those quiet moments, standing barefoot on cold earth, staring at strangers disappearing down the road, a seed was planted. Not a dream of wealth, not a dream of luxury, a dream of escape. The psychology of early hardship. Hardship does something powerful to a child. It can break them, or it can sharpen them. For Louis, deprivation became discipline. Hunger taught patience. Cold taught endurance. Labor taught skill. Isolation taught reflection. He began to understand the unspoken rules of the world. The rich traveled. The poor stayed. The makers were invisible. The users were admired. But Louis was not content to remain invisible. He did not yet know how, but he sensed that his future would not be carved in the same wood his father shaped each day. The first spark of ambition. One afternoon, a carriage stopped near the village well. A wealthy woman stepped out, her dress untouched by mud. A porter carefully lowered a large travel trunk, its brass locks shining like gold. Louis stood frozen. He watched as the porter struggled under its weight, not because it was poorly made, but because it was heavy, inefficient, impractical. The woman complained. The porter adjusted. The trunk remained the problem. Louis didn't have the language for innovation yet, but he had the instinct. He wasn't just seeing an object. He was seeing a flaw. And where others saw luxury, he saw opportunity. A mind already traveling. That evening, back in the dim light of his home, Louis traced shapes into the sawdust on the floor, rectangles, corners, flat surfaces. His father assumed he was playing, but Louis was imagining. He had never left his village. Yet his mind had already begun to travel beyond forests, beyond cities, beyond the limits of the life he was born into. He did not yet know that one day his name would circle the globe, that his designs would cross oceans, that his initials would become one of the most recognized symbols in the world. All he knew was this: he did not belong to the life he was born into. And somewhere, beyond the snowy roads of Anchai, a different future was waiting. Chapter Reflection: The Hidden Power of Hard Beginnings. Louis Vuitton's early life teaches a truth often overlooked. Comfort rarely creates vision. Hardship often does. His poverty did not give him advantages. It gave him awareness. It did not give him opportunity. It gave him hunger not just for food, but for possibility. And in the quiet moments of observation, while standing in the shadow of passing travelers, a poor carpenter's son began shaping an idea that would one day reshape luxury itself. Chapter 2: Loss at Age 1. Zero deeper emotional layer. At just 10 years old, Louis Vuitton encountered a moment that divided his life into two parts. Before loss, after loss. Until then, his world, though poor, had been held together by one quiet force, his mother. The slow arrival of fear. Her illness did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a shadow. At first, she coughed into her sleeve and smiled, insisting she was fine. She continued stitching hats late into the night, her silhouette bent over fabric in the dim glow of a candle. But children notice what adults try to hide. Louis saw the pauses between her breaths. He noticed how often she rested her hands. He heard the exhaustion in her voice when she called his name. Fear entered his life not as a single moment, but as a growing awareness that something was wrong, and no one could fix it. In rural France in the 1820s, sickness was not treated, it was endured. There were no doctors to summon, no medicine to purchase, no guarantees of recovery. Only waiting and hoping. The helplessness of a child. For the first time in his life, Louis faced a problem that work could not solve. He could carry wood. He could fetch water. He could sit quietly beside her bed. But he could not make her better. This helplessness was unbearable. Children believe effort leads to results. If they try harder, things improve. But illness ignores effort. And in that realization, Louis learned a painful truth. Love does not always save the people we love. The morning without a goodbye. The morning she died did not feel dramatic. There was no thunder, no final speech, no moment of closure, only stillness. The house felt unfamiliar in its silence. Even the air seemed heavier, as if the absence of her breathing had changed the weight of the room. His father's face told the story before words did. And just like that, the center of Louis's world vanished. No farewell. No last embrace. No chance to say what a 10-year-old doesn't yet know how to say. Grief without language. At the burial, Louis stood beside the grave, surrounded by murmured prayers and the dull thud of soil hitting wood. He did not cry. Not because he was strong. Not because he was cold. But because grief had moved beyond tears. He felt shock, confusion, fear, loneliness, a hollow ache he could not name. Children often lack the language to express grief. Instead of tears, it becomes silence. Instead of sobbing, it becomes numbness. He stared at the ground and realized something terrifying. The one person who made the world feel safe was gone, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The second loss, a father disappearing in plain sight. His father did not leave, but grief changed him. He spoke less, worked more, avoided eye contact, sat in silence where warmth once lived. Loss does not affect adults and children the same way. Where Louis needed comfort, his father withdrew into survival mode, focusing on work, routine, and responsibility. To a child, emotional absence feels like abandonment. Louis had lost his mother. Now he was losing his father to grief, the stepmother, and the end of innocence. When his father remarried, the decision was practical, but for Louis, it marked the end of whatever fragile comfort remained. His stepmother did not share his memories. She did not share his grief. She did not share his mother's gentleness. Where his mother had softened hardship, his stepmother enforced it. Her words were sharp. Her expectations were rigid. Her patience was thin. Louis was no longer a child in mourning. He was labor. When a house becomes a place to endure, the physical structure of the home remained unchanged, but emotionally it transformed. The corners felt colder. The silence felt heavier. The air felt tense. He learned to move quietly, to avoid mistakes, to anticipate criticism. He lingered outdoors longer, finding strange comfort in the open air, even in cold weather, because outside, at least, there were no harsh voices. For the first time in his life, the road felt safer than the house. And that realization changes a child forever. The inner shift from child to survivor. Loss forced Louis into a psychological transformation. Before, he had been a child shaped by poverty. Now, he became a survivor shaped by grief. He learned not to expect comfort, not to rely on stability, not to assume love would remain. This kind of emotional rupture often creates one of two paths: a life defined by fear and retreat, a life driven by independence and escape. Louis began moving quietly, internally, toward the second, the birth of a dangerous thought. The idea did not arrive as a plan. It arrived as a whisper. What if I left? At first, the thought frightened him. Leaving meant danger, hunger, uncertainty. But staying meant something equally terrifying: a life without warmth, without belonging, without hope of change. He began to notice the road more than ever before. Travelers passed through people who did not belong to this place, who were not trapped by grief or poverty. They came and went, carrying their lives with them in trunks and bags. They could leave. Why couldn't he? Pain as a catalyst. Grief does not only wound. Sometimes it reveals. It stripped away the illusion that life would naturally improve. It showed him that waiting for comfort was not a strategy. It forced him to confront the reality that no one was coming to rescue him. And in that painful clarity, a decision formed not suddenly, but inevitably. If he wanted a different life, he would have to walk toward it. Alone. The quiet decision. One evening, after another day of harsh words and silent meals, Louis sat outside, watching the last light fade behind the trees. The world was quiet. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt something other than grief. He felt resolve. He did not announce it. He did not write it down. He did not tell a soul. But in that moment, a 10-year-old boy made a decision that would change history. He would leave. Not because he was brave, but because staying required a kind of surrender he could not accept. Chapter Reflection: The moment that shapes destiny. Many people believe success begins with opportunity. Often, it begins with loss. The death of Louis Vuitton's mother did not give him strength. It gave him clarity. It showed him that life could change without warning. It showed him that security could vanish overnight. It showed him that waiting for rescue was not a plan. And in that painful understanding, a child chose movement over despair. Because sometimes, the road away from pain is the only road toward possibility. Chapter 3: The 470-kilometer walk to Paris. At just 13 years old, Louis stepped onto the dirt road before dawn, the sky still heavy with night. The village behind him slept, unaware that a boy thin, grieving, and determined was walking away from everything he had ever known. He did not leave with confidence. He left because staying hurt more than leaving. Paris lay nearly 470 kilometers away, a distance he could not truly comprehend. To him, it was not a number. It was hope. It was an escape. It was the possibility that life could be different. He carried a small cloth bag. Inside, a piece of stale bread, a wooden spoon, and the last memory of his mother, her voice, telling him to be strong. The first weeks, fear as a companion. The first nights were the hardest. He slept under trees, curled into himself to keep warm. Every sound, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant animal cries, made his heart race. He had never slept outside before. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on him from all sides. Hunger came quickly. By the third day, his bread was gone. His stomach twisted with pain, a hollow ache that made it hard to think. He knocked on farmhouse doors, offering to chop wood, carry water, or sweep floors in exchange for food. Some doors closed in his face. Others opened just enough to hand him a crust of bread. From these moments, he learned his first lesson about the world. Kindness exists, but it is never guaranteed. The long road, seasons of struggle. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. He walked through burning summers, his skin cracked by the sun. He walked through freezing winters, wrapping his feet in rags after his shoes fell apart. Snow soaked through the cloth, numbing his toes until he could no longer feel them. Sometimes he wondered if he would die on that road. But each time the thought came, another voice answered, "If you stop, everything you suffer will mean nothing." So he kept moving. The people he met. The road was not empty. It was a moving world. A farmer once let him sleep in a barn, warning him to leave before sunrise. A widow gave him soup and wept quietly as he ate, as if she saw her own lost child in his face. A merchant struck him for touching a polished trunk, shouting that a poor boy had no right to admire fine things. Louis never forgot that trunk. Its smooth leather, its brass corners, its promise of travel. In that moment, standing in the dust with stinging cheeks, he did not feel shame. He felt fascinated. Someone made this, he thought. Someone turned raw materials into something the world respects. The idea stayed with him like a spark waiting for air. When his body failed, by the second winter, his body began to fail him. His feet bled so often that he stopped noticing the pain. Each step left faint marks on the frozen ground. His hands were cracked and swollen. His ribs showed through his thin shirt. There were days he walked in a haze, barely aware of where he was. But turning back was impossible. Behind him lay grief, hunger, and a home that no longer existed. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. And so, step by step, he chose possibility. The meaning of the journey. The journey to Paris was not just a physical distance. It was the transformation of a child into someone who understood hardship, rejection, and resilience. It stripped him of comfort, but gave him something far more valuable: the ability to endure, the courage to continue, the vision to see beyond his circumstances. By the time Paris finally appeared on the horizon, a distant outline of rooftops and chimneys, Louis was no longer just a poor village boy. He was a survivor. And though he did not yet know it, the road he walked in hunger and pain was leading him toward a name the world would one day remember: Louis Vuitton. Chapter 4. Paris, the city of dreams and reality. When Louis first saw Paris, it did not look like hope. It looked like smoke. A gray haze hung over the rooftops. Chimneys coughed soot into the air. The streets roared with carts, horses, shouting vendors, and the constant grind of survival. This was not the quiet countryside he had crossed. This was a city that moved fast and crushed anything too weak to keep up. He had imagined arrival as a moment of relief. Instead, it was the beginning of a new battle. A city that did not see him. In the village, everyone knew his name. In Paris, he was invisible. Crowds flowed around him as if he were a shadow. Well-dressed men stepped past him without a glance. Women lifted their skirts to avoid the dirt near his feet. Shop windows gleamed with polished wood, fine fabrics, and leather goods objects more valuable than anything he had ever owned. He stood outside bakeries, breathing in the smell of warm bread, his stomach tightening with hunger. Inside, customers laughed and chatted as coins exchanged hands. He had no coins, only calloused hands and a stubborn will to survive. Nights without shelter. Paris was colder than he expected, not because of the weather, but because of its indifference. With no money for lodging, he slept wherever he could, inside abandoned carts, beneath market stalls, against stone walls still warm from the day's sun. Rats scurried in the dark. Drunken voices echoed through alleyways. He learned to keep one eye open, one hand gripping his small bag. Sleep was never deep. Safety was never certain. Some nights, rain soaked him to the bone. He would wake shivering, his clothes clinging to his skin, wondering how much longer his body could endure. Yet every morning he stood up, because lying down meant disappearing. Rejection after rejection. He searched for work with relentless determination. At workshops, he offered to sweep floors. At stables, he offered to shovel manure. At markets, he offered to carry loads twice his size. Most masters barely looked at him. "You're too small, too weak, too many boys already." Doors closed. Voices dismissed him. Hope thinned. Each rejection chipped away at his confidence, but not his resolve. He had not walked 470 kilometers to surrender at the first wall. Hunger as a teacher. Hunger became his constant companion, but also his teacher. It taught him to observe. He watched which shops stayed busy. He studied which craftsmen were respected. He noticed travelers arriving with elegant trunks, their belongings protected, their status undeniable. In a city where appearances shaped opportunity, the objects people carried spoke louder than words. A well-made trunk meant wealth. Durability meant trust. Design meant prestige. Louis began to see beyond hunger. He began to see systems. The turning point within. One evening, after a day of rejection, Louis sat beside the Seine, staring at the dark water. For the first time since leaving home, doubt pressed heavily on him. What if the journey was for nothing? What if Paris has no place for me? The river flowed steadily, indifferent to his questions. In that moment, he realized something profound. The city would not rescue him. Opportunity would not announce itself. No one would offer him a future out of kindness alone. If he wanted a place in Paris, he would have to become someone Paris could not ignore. Hunger could break him, or it could forge him. He chose to be forged. The quiet beginning of a legend. The next morning, he rose before sunrise and returned to the workshops not as a beggar, but as a boy determined to learn, to endure, and to earn his place. He did not yet know which door would open. He did not yet know that craftsmanship would become his path. He did not yet know that one day his name would be stamped onto trunks carried across continents. But he knew this. He had survived the road. He would survive the city. And in the heart of Paris, harsh, indifferent, and full of possibility, the foundation of Louis Vuitton was quietly being laid. Chapter 5. The workshop that changed everything. One day, Louis saw a man struggling to carry a heavy trunk into a workshop. Without hesitation, he ran to help. Inside, he saw rows of finely crafted trunks, leather, brass, polished wood, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. The workshop belonged to Monsieur Maréchal, one of Paris's most respected trunk makers. Louis asked for work. He had no experience, no skills, no references. But he had determination. Maréchal gave him a chance not as a craftsman, but as a cleaner and assistant. Louis swept floors, carried tools, watched, and when everyone left at night, he practiced. He studied the craftsmen's techniques. He imitated their work. He failed again and again until he improved. Months turned into years. The poor village boy became a skilled artisan. Chapter 6. The Empress Who Changed His Destiny. By the age of 20, Louis was no longer the silent boy sweeping workshop floors. He had become known among customers and craftsmen for something rare: precision, reliability, and a willingness to challenge tradition. While others repeated old methods, Louis observed how people actually traveled the difficulties they faced, the damage to their belongings, the inefficiency of bulky luggage. He did not just build trunks. He studied problems. Then one day, the workshop doors opened to a visitor unlike any other. A royal customer had arrived, Eugénie de Montijo, the wife of Napoleon III. Her presence changed the air in the room. Craftsmen straightened. Conversations stopped. This was not merely a wealthy client. This was a woman whose choices shaped fashion, travel, and taste across France. Yet despite her status, she was frustrated. Traditional trunks were heavy and awkward. Their rounded tops, designed for horse-drawn travel, made them impossible to stack efficiently on trains and steamships. Leather absorbed moisture and developed odors. Travel was evolving, but luggage had not. Louis listened carefully. Where others heard a complaint, he heard an opportunity. A radical proposal. With quiet confidence, he proposed a design that broke with convention. Flat-top trunks for easy stacking in trains and ships. Lightweight poplar wood to reduce carrying weight. Waterproof canvas instead of leather to resist rain and humidity. Structured compartments to protect delicate garments. Stackable geometry designed for the modern age of travel. It was a bold idea, almost audacious for a young artisan. But innovation often begins where tradition feels safest. The moment of judgment. Weeks later, Louis presented the finished trunk. The workshop fell silent as the Empress examined it. Her gloved fingers traced the clean lines. She tested the weight. She observed how easily it could be lifted and stacked. She opened it to find a carefully organized interior designed for elegance and efficiency. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she declared it extraordinary. In that single word, years of hardship, hunger, and persistence found validation. She appointed Louis as her personal trunk maker, a position of immense prestige. From that moment forward, his work would accompany royalty on journeys across Europe. His name would become associated with innovation, reliability, and refined travel. The turning point. This was more than a royal endorsement. It was a door into a new world. With the Empress's trust came visibility. With visibility came elite clientele. With elite clientele came the foundation of a brand that would redefine luxury travel. In that moment, the boy who once slept in abandoned carts became a craftsman to an empire. And the future of Louis Vuitton was no longer uncertain, it was inevitable. Chapter 7. The Birth of a Brand. With the endorsement of the Empress, Louis's reputation spread rapidly through Paris. Aristocrats, diplomats, and wealthy travelers sought out the young craftsman whose trunks combined elegance with practicality. In a city where status was everything, his work had become a quiet symbol of refinement. Yet success inside another man's workshop came with limits. Louis faced a defining choice: remain a respected employee, secure, stable, and confined, or risk everything to build a future under his own name. He chose the risk, a bold step into the unknown. In 1854, Louis opened his own shop on Rue Neuve des Capucines, a bustling Parisian street near the heart of fashion and commerce. The location was strategic, close to luxury boutiques, grand hotels, and the routes traveled by Europe's elite. Outside hung a simple sign: Louis Vuitton Maletier, trunk maker. There were no gold letters, no grand display, no guarantee of success. Only a name and the courage to stand behind it. The reality of ownership. Owning a shop was not glamorous. Louis rose before sunrise and worked late into the night. He negotiated with suppliers, selected wood, stretched canvas, hammered brass fittings, and inspected every seam. Mistakes cost money. Delays cost reputation. One dissatisfied client could damage the fragile trust he was building. The work was exhausting, but it was his. For the first time in his life, Louis was not surviving someone else's world. He was shaping his own. Why the elite came. Paris's elite did not come merely because of royal approval. They came because Louis understood a changing world. Travel was evolving. Railways connected cities. Steamships crossed seas. Journeys that once took months now took weeks. People needed luggage that could endure handling, stacking, weather, and long distances without sacrificing elegance. Louis's flat-topped, stackable trunks answered these needs perfectly. They were not just beautiful, they were engineered for the modern traveler. Each trunk told a story of movement, ambition, and the desire to arrive in style. A name begins to mean something. At first, customers came out of curiosity. Then they came out of trust. Soon, they came because the name itself carried meaning. The small shop became a destination. Orders increased. Apprentices were hired. Techniques refined. Standards elevated. What began as a single craftsman's gamble was quietly becoming something larger, a house of quality built on resilience, innovation, and relentless attention to detail. Louis understood that a brand was not a logo or a sign. It was a promise kept again and again. And in that modest shop in Paris, the promise of Louis Vuitton had just begun. Chapter 8: War and Near Bankruptcy. Just as Louis's business began to flourish, history intervened with brutal force. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War erupted, plunging France into chaos. Paris, the heart of culture, fashion, and commerce, was placed under siege. Supply lines were cut. Food became scarce. Fear replaced elegance. The wealthy clients who once filled Louis's shop fled the city or turned their attention to survival rather than luxury. Almost overnight, orders stopped. The workshop that had echoed with the sounds of craftsmanship fell silent. A city under siege. Paris transformed into a city of desperation. Markets emptied. Horses disappeared from the streets, not because they were gone, but because they had been eaten. Coal ran out. Winters felt harsher than ever. For a maker of luxury trunks, the timing could not have been worse. Travel had halted. aristocrats, had vanished. No one needed fine luggage in a starving city. Louis faced a terrifying reality. Bankruptcy was no longer a distant fear. It was imminent. The cost of survival. He made painful decisions to keep the doors open. He sold tools he had once cherished. He reduced material purchases to the bare minimum. He dismissed workers he could no longer afford to pay. Eventually, he worked alone in the workshop he had built with such hope. Each empty day tested his resolve. Each unpaid bill threatened to erase years of effort. He could have closed the shop, abandoned Paris, and started over elsewhere. But he refused. Closing the shop would mean surrendering the name he had fought to establish. It would mean admitting that hardship once again had the final word. Louis had not survived hunger, rejection, and the long road to Paris to be defeated by circumstance. Holding the line. During the siege, he repaired old trunks rather than crafting new ones. He offered practical solutions instead of luxury. He adapted, doing whatever was necessary to remain relevant and alive. This period reshaped his understanding of business. Luxury could disappear overnight, but reputation, resilience, endurance, these could outlast war. After the silence, demand. When the war finally ended and Paris began to rebuild, something remarkable happened. Travel resumed, trade reopened, families returned. The elite, eager to reclaim normalcy, once again prepared for journeys across Europe. And they needed luggage that was durable, reliable, and worthy of their status. Demand did not simply return. It exploded. Louis was ready. Because he had endured when others closed, his name remained. His workshop stood. His reputation for reliability during hardship made him more trusted than ever. He did not just recover. He expanded, hiring craftsmen, increasing production, and refining designs that would define modern travel. The war had nearly destroyed his business. Instead, it forged its strength. And the legacy of Louis Vuitton emerged not weakened, but unbreakable. Chapter 9. Building an Empire. By 1871, after surviving war, near bankruptcy, and relentless struggle, Louis Vuitton was ready for the next chapter. He opened a larger workshop in Asnières, just outside Paris. The building was modest by today's standards, but to Louis, it was a palace of possibility. For the first time, he could control the entire process, from raw wood and canvas to the finished trunk under one roof, crafting excellence at scale. Louis hired skilled workers and took on apprentices, young boys like himself who had a hunger for craft. He personally trained each one, insisting on perfection in every cut, every stitch, every hinge. Mistakes were not tolerated. Mediocrity was not acceptable. He refined designs, experimenting with materials and structure. Flat-topped stackable trunks became his signature, but he didn't stop there. Canvas coverings replaced leather in some models, brass locks gleamed in the light, and each trunk was made to withstand the rough handling of modern travel. Louis understood something revolutionary. Luxury is not about price. It is about perception. A trunk could cost more than a month's wages for an average worker, but the right person would pay it because it symbolized status, refinement, and belonging to a world most could only dream of. The psychology of exclusivity. Louis sold deliberately to the elite, aristocrats, diplomats, and influential travelers. Their approval created desire. Others, seeing these powerful figures with Vuitton trunks, wanted the same. By focusing on the top tier, Louis created scarcity and aspiration. His strategy was brilliant. Luxury was a game of perception, not just craftsmanship. Owning a Vuitton trunk became a statement. I have arrived. I am part of the world that matters. Orders grew steadily. The workshop buzzed with activity. Apprentices became skilled artisans. Louis's reputation soared beyond Paris, reaching the capitals of Europe. Foundations for a legacy. By this point, Louis was no longer just a craftsman. He was a visionary entrepreneur. He understood that to build an empire, he needed more than talent. He needed discipline, innovation, and control over quality. The Assignier workshop wasn't just a place of production. It was the birthplace of a dynasty, a workshop that would define the modern concept of luxury for generations to come. The foundation of Louis Vuitton's empire had been laid, and the world was about to take notice. Chapter 10. A legacy passed on. When Louis died in 1892, he left his business to his son, Georges Vuitton. His final advice: never sell cheap. Protect the brand. Adapt, but never lose identity. Georges honored that vision. He introduced the LV monogram in 1896 to fight counterfeits, a design now recognized worldwide. He expanded internationally. He transformed the company into a global luxury brand. Chapter 11. Surviving Wars and Changing Times. Through world wars, economic crises, and changing travel habits, the company evolved. Under Gaston Louis Vuitton, the brand expanded into handbags and fashion accessories. Luxury was no longer just for travel, it became part of everyday identity. The Speedy bag, the Keepall, the Noe. Icons were born. Chapter 12. The Rise of a Luxury Giant. In the late 20th century, visionary leadership transformed the brand again. The creation of LVMH merged Louis Vuitton with other luxury houses, forming the world's largest luxury group. Under Bernard Arnault, the brand expanded globally, entering markets in Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. Today, Louis Vuitton represents craftsmanship, exclusivity, status, heritage. What began as survival became a global empire. Chapter 13. Lessons from Louis Vuitton's journey. This story is not about bags. It is about principles. Your beginnings do not define your ending. Louis started with nothing, not even a home. Hardship can become your greatest advantage. Poverty taught him resilience and observation. Innovation beats tradition. Flat trunks changed travel forever. Serve the top to inspire the rest. Luxury created desire worldwide. Protect your identity. The LV monogram preserved authenticity. Chapter 14. Why this story matters today. You may not want to build a fashion empire, but you are building something. A career, a business, a dream, a better future. And like Louis, you will face rejection, fear, failure, doubt. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is simple. They keep walking, even when the road is long, even when the destination is uncertain. From nothing to legacy. A homeless boy walked 470 kilometers with no money. He slept in the streets. He begged for work. He failed again and again. And he built a name that still defines luxury nearly 2 centuries later. That is the power of determination. That is the power of vision. That is the power of refusing to quit. If this story inspired you, remember, your current situation is not your final destination.